Chapter 14. The Rendezvous. As our friendship continued to grow, so did Mike's willingness to share more of his encounters with me. I still wondered if it had something to do with the fact that I didn't require a picture or other proof to believe him. Throughout our telephone conversations, he began to, once again, tentatively allude to something in conversation, only to call or email me a couple of days later and tell me to check the docs. When I did, there would be another explosion of information sitting there waiting for me to absorb.
Remember?
He said one day, as we were well into another 3-hour phone call.
When I mentioned something early on that there were others around?
Yeah, I said. I waited.
Well, I was withholding stuff again. Sorry.
He sounded hangdog. I laughed. Mike was always apologizing for not trusting me, for not telling me everything. And I was always telling him that he didn't need to apologize, that I understood, that he was welcome to share whatever he felt comfortable sharing. I learned a long time ago that respecting someone's boundaries, whatever they may be, is crucial to building a successful friendship, and I reminded him of that again.
I know. I know. I just feel bad for not trusting you, not telling you everything. Anyway,
He continued.
check the docs. I wrote something in there for you about that.
He went on to tell me most of the story over the phone. What he told me was astonishing, not simply due to what he had witnessed, but how, once again, Mike's experiences validated some of my own suspicions. In August of 2006, I had published an article in my OregonBigfoot.com email newsletter about Bigfoot meeting places, specifically breeding grounds. I was pregnant for the first time when I wrote it, and pregnancy was understandably on my mind. I began thinking about how Sasquatches might mate, and how a female would deal with the difficulty and inevitable vulnerability of pregnancy. Waddling around as I was, grossly uncomfortable in the comfort of my civilized, convenient world, I wondered how a pregnant Bigfoot would cope in the wild. Who would care for her before and after the birth? Did infant Sasquatches cry at birth as human babies do? Was there a concern that someone might hear them? That got me thinking. Many long-term witnesses I'd interviewed had described noticing that the creatures seemed to vanish during certain times of the year, only to reappear during a change of season. The witness, Michelle, whom I'd worked with in California, had mentioned this. She also related that one year the creatures had returned in the spring, and she'd watched a female, obviously pregnant before her disappearance, hold up an infant during a brief sighting, as if showing the witness her new offspring. Then I considered the rare instances in which witnesses reported seeing many creatures gathered in one location. I wondered if the two things might be related. Did Sasquatches ever gather in groups larger than small family units? And if so, to what purpose? For breeding? For protection and care during late pregnancy and after birth? Or simply for communion with others of their kind? I decided to explore the idea and write an article about it for the newsletter. Here is the full text of that article, as it was published in August of 2006. Sasquatch Breeding Grounds by Autumn Williams. Dozens of Sasquatch adults, juveniles, and infants coexisting in a remote box canyon over the winter. Unfortunately, absolutely nothing is known about Sasquatch mating or breeding habits, since there's been no official discovery. And although eyewitnesses will tell you Bigfoot exists, the majority of the scientific community might argue otherwise. With that aside, I can offer some ideas I've been pondering about this for quite some time. This is the first time I've published anything in depth about this theory of mine, and let me remind you, it's only a theory. an idea. In no way do I attest that anything in this article is fact, only speculation. But if you'll humor me and read on, you may find this topic of speculation as fascinating as I do. It's safe to say that Sasquatch would be a mammal, that is, a warm-blooded creature that is viviparous, gives birth to live offspring. Gestation, the period of time in which an embryo grows to a mature fetus within the womb, differs between mammal species. I've learned a lot about this lately, being currently pregnant myself. As a general rule, the larger the mammal, the longer the gestation period. Human gestation takes approximately 266 days. African gorillas take somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 to 296 days, with an average of 8.5 months. Horses gestate for about 48 weeks, or 12 months. So gestation varies a lot, from species to species, and within the individual pregnancy, depending on any number of factors. With those species as size comparisons, though, let's take a stab at a Sasquatch gestation period. They're built similarly to a human, being bipedal. And although their upper torso may be similar in size to an adult gorilla's, there is extra leg mass to consider. On the low end, I'd guess 9 months. But due to the extra size of the creature, I'd venture to say that the gestation period might last 12 months or longer. Being pregnant myself, I have a new appreciation for how difficult life can be while you're carrying a child. And that's with all the modern conveniences we humans are used to. Sasquatch moms-to-be don't have the luxury of supermarkets, refrigerators, comfortable beds in warm homes. You get the idea. While the question of whether Sasquatch is closer to human or animal is something still open to debate, I'd like to take this moment to make what may be a somewhat controversial suggestion. I propose that Sasquatches may very well meet in mass in order to breed and give birth to young. Now, at first glance, this proposition may appear fanciful, too good to be true, even outrageous. But let me share my reasoning behind this idea and where it came from. There are a few stories of eyewitnesses claiming to observe family units and/or large gatherings of these creatures. Take, for instance, the story of Albert Ostman, who claimed a detailed encounter with a family group. Briefly, Ostman claimed to have been abducted near the Toba Inlet in British Columbia in 1924. After a harrowing night of being carried in his sleeping bag on the back of something, he was finally set down and crawled out. He described interacting with a family of 4 creatures in a box canyon.
I could see now that I was in a small valley or basin, about 8 or 10 acres, surrounded by high mountains. On the southeast side, there was a V-shaped opening, about 8 feet wide at the bottom and about 20 feet high at the highest point. That must be the way I came in.
He also describes their shelter.
On my way back, I noticed where these people were sleeping. On the east side wall of this valley was a shelf in the mountainside with overhanging rock, looking something like a big undercut in a big tree, about 10 feet deep and 30 feet wide.
When reading Ostman's account 16 years or so ago in John Green's book, Sasquatch, The Apes Among Us, I was certainly fascinated, but didn't give much thought at the time to family units and how they come to be. It wasn't until many years later that I revisited Ostman's story when an idea began brewing in my head. The next account I'd like to refer to is the story of Muchalat Harry from 1928. Once again, it is the story of a man who was abducted while sleeping. This witness described a similar shelter to the one Albert Ostman described. However, The number of creatures he described was astounding. When daylight came, he was able to see that he was in a sort of camp, under a high rock shelf and surrounded by some 20 Bigfoot. They were of all sexes and sizes. The final story, and the one that ultimately caused me to examine Sasquatch breeding habits and the possibility that breeding and birthing may be a community phenomenon, was published in Seattle Magazine in August of 1970. It isn't widely disseminated. I found it quite by accident on the internet years ago. It's unclear whether the Vancouver referred to in this article is Vancouver, British Columbia, or Vancouver, Washington. Since the paragraph precluding this one discussed the Osman story within this same news article, I'm inclined to think it refers, once again, to the Vancouver, BC area. A similar story comes from Warren Scott, a 37-year-old Seattle man who works as a building superintendent. It was June of 1961, and Scott, who grew up in a tough neighborhood in New York City and spent several years bumming around after his release from the Army, was camping alone 30 miles northeast of Vancouver. Late at night, a Sasquatch kidnapped him and carried him 70 miles. During the journey, Scott was almost suffocated by the creature's vice-like grip and uremic odor. Eventually, he was carried through a long tunnel and dumped in a cave. Most of Scott's ordeal was spent in this hot, fire-lit enclosure. The mother took care of him, bringing him food, consisting of greens and inedible chunks of raw meat. The old man was seldom around.
I was treated like a pet.
Scott recalls. He endured some good-natured whacking on the rump. He was watched intently when passing wastes, and he engaged in some rock rolling with the kids. The noise and the smell were terrific. At night, father, mother, and son Sasquatch would hold each other tightly, rock for 10 minutes, and then drop off to sleep on bough beds. One day, Scott wandered out of the momentarily unguarded cave and was terrified to see 50 or 60 Sasquatch wandering about in the canyon.
The female who fed me came up to me, grabbed me, and held me to her bosom until I was calm. Then she put me down.
Soon thereafter, Scott's protector took him, together with her own son, on a tour of the other caves, one of which proved to be a very busy nursery. A few days later, Scott located the densely curtained tunnel opening and made his escape. What interested me about these 3 reports were the startling similarities between them. All 3 presumably occurred in British Columbia, contained an abduction of a human to a remote area where multiple creatures were seen using caves or overhangs as shelters, and 2 of the reports contained elements of tribal Bigfoot gatherings. Who knows whether any of these reports turn out to be true and accurate? But, for the sake of argument, let's assume there is truth to them. The final report, despite the strangeness of the fire-lit enclosure, really got me thinking. Scott claimed to have viewed a nursery. Was this an isolated case? Perhaps. But Much-a-Lot Harry described seeing multiple juvenile creatures as well. What would cause so many creatures to collect in such a small area? Wouldn't that number of bodies put an incredible strain on available food resources? Probably. But consider this. Perhaps gathering for breeding and birthing would be beneficial. Let's examine the following scenario. First, let's pick up the trail of a female Sasquatch at some point in her young adult life. She's lived in a small family group with her parents since infancy, staying somewhat in the same area. Each family has its own stomping grounds, and although family groups may run into each other from time to time, they haven't yet run into a single male juvenile who is available for her. Mom and Pop Bigfoot know that she's matured and ready to mate. This October, they take her on a journey, far from their usual home, to a box canyon high in the remote mountains. It's an area where creatures from miles around have gathered for centuries, during the winter months, to breed and give birth. She's never been here before, and Mom and Pop haven't been here since she was born. There simply wasn't a reason to make the trek again. Until now. After days, perhaps weeks of traveling, they reach the Box Canyon. There are dozens of creatures and many family groups milling around. Several females are huge with pregnancy. As newcomers and the winter weather arrive, the canyon fills to capacity. The Box Canyon, though high in the mountains, provides caves that will maintain a moderate temperature throughout the winter. Pregnant females find shelter in the caves. Their mates, the parents of breeding-age offspring, and even the mature juvenile offspring themselves forage for food for the entire group, providing sustenance for the pregnant females who cannot hunt and forage. As the infants are born, there is a communal effort to provide food for breastfeeding mothers. In addition, the group provides warm bodies and protection for the vulnerable young offspring. This is an opportune time for sexually mature offspring to find a mate and breed. By finding a mate at a gathering, the offspring can better their chances of mixing up the gene pool, thereby avoiding birth defects from inbreeding. By copulating during the gathering, pregnancy would be timed properly so that the birth would occur during the following year's gathering, thus allowing the pregnant female the advantages of community. The babies are born one by one, mostly throughout December, January, and February. The infants mature more rapidly than humans do and are ready for travel by April. In the early spring, the gathering begins to break up. Each family group begins the journey back to their old stomping grounds. Next year, the pregnant females and their mates will likely make the journey earlier, to avoid traveling when she is far along in her pregnancy. Once the infant is born, they may not make the journey again for many years. Okay, wait a minute, Autumn. Where are you getting all of these crazy ideas? Native Americans lived in relatively isolated communities and would arrange marriages in order to avoid incest and inbreeding. Why would Sasquatch be any different? With something as important as survival of the species at stake, do you suppose Bigfoot families just wait around in hopes that a family with an equally eligible youngster of the opposite sex might happen by? Or would they have developed, long ago, a means by which to facilitate breeding? Are you finding it hard to swallow this idea? Perhaps because you're assuming that they're more gorilla-like and less like, say, a Neanderthal? So why did I choose the winter months? Why not the summer, when food is plentiful at all elevations? Well, for a couple of reasons. First, the time during which it is most difficult for a pregnant female to find food might be the best time to rely on the community to help. Secondly, and most importantly, I have numerous reports from eyewitnesses, both long-term and incidental, that tell of female Sasquatches being seen with young infants, predominantly in the spring. In addition, the number of reports of creatures seemingly passing through rural areas tends to increase in the spring and fall. So there you have it. Again, please remember that these are ideas, not beliefs. It could also be that the creatures simply stumble around in the woods, bump into one another, breed, and give birth on the fly. I think it's unlikely, simply because the closest model we have to a Sasquatch lifestyle is early Native Americans, and they didn't do things that way, for good reason. Also, researchers often ponder whether these creatures are territorial or nomadic. Weren't early Native Americans both, in a way? They'd choose a spot to inhabit, but then would journey occasionally to other areas for a specific purpose. One final thought. Could you imagine coming across one of those box canyons and seeing a gathering with your own eyes? Wow! Of course, the creatures there might be overprotective and not quite friendly. I have my ideas about where some of these areas might exist. Where do you think they might be? Why do you think, if the above stories were accurate, these creatures would kidnap humans and bring them into a gathering place? Autumn Williams, August 17th, 2006. When I wrote this, I was primarily focused on the idea that Sasquatches might gather during a particular season for the purpose of mating or bearing young. Doing so in a communal setting might offer protection and care that would otherwise be lacking to a small family unit. Rather than the adult male being solely responsible for providing food and protection for the pregnant female, any current offspring and a newborn infant, all able-bodied adults and older juveniles in a communal setting could pitch in, as it were. But as I was writing, I was imagining groups of these creatures, family units, if you will, coming to this place simply for the purpose of communion as well. Mike and I had never discussed my breeding grounds article, nor did he have any idea what I was referring to when I mentioned it after reading his encounter. As far as I know, as I write this book and share it with Mike as I write it, this will be the first time he's ever read this article I'd written. When you read what Mike left for me in our docs that day, I think you'll understand why I was so floored by what he claimed to have witnessed, and why he didn't want to tell me before now. Editor's note. When asked to give a date, Mike thought this occurred in 2005 or 2006.
It was early October when I saw what I call the skunk ape convention. They were everywhere. At first, I thought I was seeing the same one over and over. But I got to thinking, and to see him every place that I did, he would have to be running all the time. The big guy was taking a lot of food to go. I had to make more trips to town to get more, and it was costing a lot of money. I decided that I was going to follow him the next time he took food out into the swamp. It was almost sundown when he came into camp, and I was ready for him. I had his food in a box, which he took and sat down by the log and ate, and as he ate, I bagged up the rest. I had a big paper bag that you put yard waste in. I had fruit, bread, nuts, cookies. It was most of the remaining food. I held back a little in case he came back later. He finished eating, and like always, he lay back against the log and burped, resting his head back, looking up at the sky. It was getting dark, and I wanted him to go so I could follow him. I wanted to see what he was doing with all the food. I set the bag next to him and said, "So I guess you'll be going now." He didn't move, he just stared at the sky. I said again, "You better get going. It's getting dark. Don't want you walking into a tree out there." Still, he didn't move. He just sat there looking up at the sky. I sat down beside him and did what he was doing. I looked up and said, "What are you looking at up there?" His reply was to cut a huge fart. I rolled over to get away from the stench. Getting up, I held out some paper towels and said, "Do you want to wipe your butt, you nasty asshole fart?" He didn't move, not even a blink of an eye. By now, the sun was almost down and it was getting dark. I sat down on the cooler and stared at him, not saying a word. After a while, he sat up, looked around, got to his feet, and walked to the edge of camp, looking out into the darkness. I think he was waiting for someone. He made a whistling sound and stood there like he was waiting for a reply. He whistled again, and this time He got the reply he was waiting for. He whistled back and turned around, picked up the bag, walked over to where I was sitting, and took his finger and flipped my hat off my head, turned and walked into the darkness. I waited about 2 minutes and grabbed my hat and pack and walked out after him. I was walking down a trail and hadn't gone far when he stepped out from behind a tree and huffed at me. His breath was foul, and I almost gagged. I stepped back and said, "Hey, funny running into you out here." He took his hand and put it on my chest and pushed me backward. I stepped back toward him and said, "I want to know who you're feeding out." "Here, you got a girlfriend out here somewhere?" He turned and started walking, and I followed. I took about 10 steps, and he turned and pushed me back, a little harder this time. I knew better than to push my luck, so I let him go. I had to come up with another plan. The next morning, I got up early and headed for town to get more food. It was a bright, sunny day, and I knew I wouldn't see him until late afternoon. I drove by the local feed store and got an idea. I wondered if he would eat cow or horse feed, maybe some sweet pellets. I walked around looking at the different feed and decided on some sweet cow feed. It was in pellets, and a 50-pound bag was only $5. If he'd eat some of this, it'd save me a lot of money. Also, I could leave it in a feeder and he'd always have something to eat when I wasn't around. I got 10 loaves of day-old bread, fruit, nuts, and some vegetables, and headed back to the swamp. When I got back to camp, he was waiting for me. He was standing by the log as I pulled my skiff up to camp. Climbing out of the skiff, I said, "I didn't expect to see you this early. What's up?" He walked up to me and pushed me backward. I stumbled back, almost falling, and said, "What the hell you doing?" He looked down by the wood pile, and there was a cottonmouth coiled up, ready to strike. I would have stepped in striking range if he hadn't pushed me. I pulled my pistol and was going to shoot it, and I saw him stepping back with a scared look on his face. "Oh, I forgot. Sorry," I said, and put the gun back in the holster. I picked up the axe, chopped his head off, and threw it in the creek. "Thanks, buddy. I didn't see that little bastard. He might have bit me. I've got to be more careful. You hungry? You want to eat?" I took a loaf of bread, poured cane syrup on it, and handed it to him. He sat on the log and ate it. While he was doing that, I got some of the cow feed, put it in a big metal pan, and walked over to him. "Try this. See if you like it." He sniffed at it, then took a handful and put it in his mouth. He chewed it up and swallowed and took some more. "Hey, Mikey, he likes it." I said, "Well, I don't know if it's good for you, but it costs a lot less." I didn't give him too much of it at a time. I was afraid it'd make him ill or gain too much weight, so I'd put a pound of it in with the rest of his food along with Quaker oatmeal. He seemed to like it. I could write a skunk ape cookbook. I was always coming up with some new dish for him. While I was feeding him, I thought I saw something moving out in the swamp. I stopped and looked to see what it was. It was a dark figure moving from tree to tree. I'd seen this before. That's what the big guy does when he is being sneaky, but it was too far out to get a good look. I said, "It looks like someone's spying on us. He a friend of yours? What you say we call him in?" The big guy never looked up from his food. He just kept eating. So I packed some more food, this time in a big cardboard box, and put about 10 pounds of the cow feed in with it. It was around 4 p.m., and when he finished eating, he knelt down and took a big drink from the creek. He stood up and burped. Walking to the edge of camp, he made a yelping sound like he was calling to someone. I handed him the box of food, and he left. This time, it was still daylight. I got my binoculars from the skiff, sat down on the log, and watched him walk away, carrying the box under one arm. He got about 300 yards out. All I could see was from his shoulders up because of the underbrush. Then I saw two more heads pop up, then another. Then they all knelt down and went out of my sight. I guess they were eating. That's what they do. They squat down with the food in the middle and help themselves till it's gone. I kept watching, and a head popped up and was looking around. It was Enoch. I guess he wasn't hungry after eating in camp, so it looked like he was keeping an eye out for danger while the others ate. After about 10 minutes, the other heads popped up, one at a time, and they stood around for a few minutes and then disappeared in the underbrush. I sat there thinking that I'd never seen so many skunk apes at one time. What the hell was going on? A damn skunk ape convention? Later that night, I sat by the fire, staring at the flames. My thoughts drifted back to my past and the ones I had lost. A deep sadness came over me, and the loneliness closed in. I was going to my dark place. I had gone there many times before and knew the trail well. It had made me retreat to the safety of the swamp, far away from people. I couldn't deal with the world or my pain, so I tried to hide from it, sitting alone in the darkness. Little did I know that my salvation would walk out of the darkness of that swamp and pull me into the light, giving me a reason to go on. He breathed life back into my lifeless soul, pulling me back from the brink, and I'm forever grateful to my big hairy friend. But feeling the way that I did, I wasn't in the mood for skunk ape bullshit. That night, I was drifting off to sleep when something came flying into camp, hitting the table, knocking things off it. I jumped up and saw another piece hit the ground in front of me. Some asshole was throwing wood at me. I picked it up and threw it back as hard as I could. I picked up the stuff that fell off the table, found that piece of wood, and threw it back. I sat back down and they kept throwing wood at me. I got up and went to the skiff. I got a glass, filled it with gas, walked over by the fire and waited. Another piece came flying in, and I dumped the gas on the fire. The fireball rose into the air with a big roar. I stood in front of the fire and yelled, "Don't fuck with me tonight, assholes!" I could hear him running off like a bunch of sissies. Skunk ape sissies, I said to myself. I'd read somewhere about a Cherokee rite of passage where they take a boy into the woods at night and blindfold him. They sit him down on a stump and he has to sit there all night and not move or cry out for help. He can't take the blindfold off until the sun shines through it. When he takes it off, he will be a man. And when he takes it off, he sees his father sitting next to him and didn't know that he had been there all night, protecting him from harm. I got a rag and walked out into the swamp. There was a stump a quarter mile from camp. I felt it'd do just fine. I had no gun, no knife, no nothing, not even a stick of gum. I was there for them to do what they wanted with me. I was going to show them that I was not afraid of them, and they didn't need to be afraid of me. I was going to prove to them and myself that I wasn't afraid. I folded the rag to make a blindfold, put it on, and pulled it tight. I sat there listening to the sounds of the swamp, the frogs, the distant call of a night bird, the sounds of little creatures passing by, not paying me no mind. I don't know how long I'd been sitting, waiting, but after a while, I heard something coming up from behind, something big. I could hear it breathing. I sat still, waiting for whatever fate it had in store for me. Then it walked away, maybe a bear checking me out and saw I was a nut but wanted something else. My heart was beating fast, but after a few minutes, I calmed down and was pleased with myself that I didn't run away like a sissy skunk ape. I was chuckling to myself. I thought about what they must have thought when I poured that gas in the fire. I was glad the bugs weren't too bad. A breeze was blowing through the swamp, keeping them at bay. After a while, I heard something walk right up to me. It was right in front of me, and from the smell, I guessed it was Enoch. He stood there, not moving. I could feel him staring at me. I sat still, not saying a word. He walked around me, trying to figure out what I was doing. Then he walked away. I counted his footsteps. There were 8, and then silence. I wish he would have stayed. It felt good having him there. It was late. From the coolness in the air, I guessed around 3 a.m. I was tired and was drifting in and out of sleep. I wanted the sun to come up. Then I heard something behind me, then something to my right, then my left. They were all around me. I could smell them and hear their breathing. I waited, listened to every sound, not moving. My heart was beating fast and I wanted to run. Run, you fool. Get out of there, my mind was saying. But then a calm came over me, a feeling that I was safe. My heart slowed down, my breathing went back to normal. I had a voice in my head told me to be strong, that the darkness in me would go away and that I'd be all right. It told me that I wasn't alone and to hold out my hands. I slowly lifted my arms out to the side. I felt someone take my left hand, then my right hand. I could feel the warmth and the strength of the hands holding mine. Then I felt hands on my shoulders, gently touching me. I felt safe. I wasn't afraid anymore. Slowly and one by one, the hands left me. I could hear the footsteps go silent, and I was alone again. I sat there with tears running down my face. I felt like a big weight had lifted off me, and I could breathe once again. I must have drifted off to sleep. I was awakened by the sounds of the morning songbirds, and I knew it was daylight. I could see the sun shining through the blindfold. I took it off, and there, standing in front of me, was Enoch. "Good morning," I said. "I'm glad to see you, my friend. You want to eat?" I got up, and we walked back to camp. I was starving and ate like a pig. The days went on. I'd walk into the swamp and see skunk apes everywhere. You couldn't swing a dead cat without hitting one. But I noticed they were just passing through, going deeper into the swamp. I wanted to know where they were going, so I packed heavy and followed them, keeping my distance. I went deeper and deeper into the swamp. I had never been this far before, and it was getting harder to get through. As the mud got deeper, so did the water, and I found myself up to my neck in gator-infested swamp. I held my pack over my head until I came out of the deep water. I climbed up on a deadfall log and rested, looking at my arms. I could see the leeches hanging down, sucking my blood, some so fat they could hardly hold on. These came off easy. The rest, I put salt on and they dropped off. I took off my shirt and pants and got the rest off me. The ones on my back, I had to reach around with my knife and scrape off as best I could. After getting dressed, I looked at the time. It was late. I didn't know how much farther I had to go, and I knew I didn't want to wade through this swamp in the dark. I took my hatchet, cut some small trees, and made a platform over the log to sleep on for the night. I chopped a flat area on the log and put mud on it so I could have a small fire, a small comfort in this swamp of no comfort. It was dark, and I had a small fire going. I opened a can of soup, sat in the can next to the fire to heat. I put on some dry clothes, hanging the others to dry. I'd made a bed from moss and cabbage tree fronds, making sure I had a thick layer between me and the moss to help keep the chiggers from biting. I ate my soup and crackers and went to sleep, waking up at the crack of dawn. I ate some peanut butter and crackers, packed up, put the wet clothes back on, slipped into the water and headed out. I still didn't know where I was going, and nobody knew where I was. I was on my own. If I got hurt, I was dead. Coming out of the water, the land rose up and was, for the most part, dry and thick with trees. It was midday, and I stopped under a large oak and rested. I was tired, so I took off my boots, dried my feet, and made camp, hanging my wet things on bushes to dry. You have to make sure you keep your feet as dry as you can and tend to any open wound or sores at once, or you risk infection. This is so important. I can't stress it enough. You have to take care of yourself out there, or you could get sick and die and nobody will ever find you. I also want to say, when you're in the woods, or this case, a swamp, eat what you can find, not what you brought. If you do this, you have a better chance of surviving longer, and you always have a reserve of food. With that in mind, I went fishing and caught some catfish and cooked them up. I decided that this was a good place to make a camp, so I built a hut out of cabbage palm fronds to get me out of the weather and bugs, and most of all, to keep dry. The next day, I got up and headed out looking for any signs of the big guys. It wasn't long before I found some tracks. I followed them deep into the woods, trying to be as quiet as I could. Through my binoculars, I could see a small clearing with knee-high grass and a large black figure standing on the edge of it. It turned and looked right at me and started coming toward me. I stood my ground and waited to see what it would do. I watched it, and it vanished right in front of me. He was there 1 second, gone next. He had ducked down and was sneaking up on me. I think he didn't know that I saw him. He was watching me, peeking around trees, checking me out. I walked on to the clearing, and he followed, thinking I didn't know that he was there. In the middle of the clearing, I found deer tracks, and on the other side, wild hog tracks. I think he was waiting for a deer or hog to come to feed and would run out of the woods and kill it for food. I didn't stay long. I didn't want to mess things up for him, so I headed back to camp. They knew I was here now, and all I had to do was go back to camp and wait. They'd find me. That night, I was in camp cooking the gator I killed on my way back to camp. There was much more meat than I could eat. I hoped that Enoch would find me so I could share it with him. I had no other food to give him, so it'd have to do. As it cooked over the fire, I waited. I could hear them out in the woods, walking around, but they wouldn't come in too close. I was getting ready to go to sleep, and I heard a grunt behind me. Turning around, I saw Enoch standing there like a big tree. "Hey, pal, long time no see. You want to eat?" He stepped forward, and I got the rest of the gator tail and handed it to him. "Sorry, this is all I got. Maybe tomorrow I can kill a hog." He took the gator tail and started to eat, taking big bites. It was gone in a few minutes, and I said, "That's all I got. If you want more, you'll have to get it yourself." He hung around for a while, then I looked up, and he was gone. No goodbye, just gone. That's right. Eat and run, and don't worry about a tip. I'm good. The next day, I went back to the clearing and looked around. Just inside the tree line, I could see a lot of movement. Looking through my binoculars, I could see at least 6 skunk apes moving around, eating leaves, grass, and anything else they could find. I hid inside a large clump of palmettos and watched them most of the day. They come into the clearing, eat grass and bugs, and just lay in the sun. I watched them for the next 2 days. On the third day, I was laying on my belly watching them when something grabbed my foot and pulled me out of my hiding place. I rolled over, and it was Enoch standing over me with a strange look on his face. I thought he wasn't happy with me, so I got to my feet and said, "Sorry, big guy." I felt stupid, like a peeping Tom who had been caught peeking in someone's window. I reached in my pack, pulled out 2 bluebirds, and handed them to him, which he ate right down. I took the wrappers and licked the sugar off them. In the woods, that was a treat not to be wasted. I dug a hole with my foot and covered him up. He seemed to lighten up a bit. He walked to the edge of the clearing, turned, and looked at me. Somehow I knew he wanted me to go with him, so I followed him into the clearing. When we got to the middle of the clearing, he stopped, and I walked up and stood beside him. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Skunk apes. Big ones, little ones, were looking at me from the woods. I think he was letting them know that I was his friend and could be trusted. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, dumbfounded. I stepped in front of Enoch to let him get a good look at me. Then I raised my hand and said, "Hello, my friends. I'm Mike. I want to be your friend." I don't think they understood, but I felt I needed to say something. The little ones hid behind their mothers, peeking around from behind. afraid of the human that stood before him. I stood there, taking it all in. I wanted to remember every second because this would never happen again. I turned around to talk to Enoch and he was gone. I looked around and there was no sign of him. I looked back at the others, waved and walked away, stopping every few feet to take another look. They all watched me go. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, turned around and waved again, and this time I made an Indian call. I turned and slipped into the woods and went back to camp for the rest of the day. I planned to return the next day. I was going to walk into that clearing alone and see what happened. I cooked the catfish I had caught. I ate my fill and saved the rest in case the big guy came around, but he didn't show that night. It was quiet all night, no sounds of footsteps in the woods. I kind of missed it. I slept good that night. A light rain was falling, so I set up a small tarp to catch the rainwater. I was glad, as I was getting tired of the taste of boiled swamp water. The next morning, I ate the rest of the catfish and cooked a small pot of oatmeal sprinkled with brown sugar. I like to eat oatmeal. It keeps me filled up for a long time. I had caught almost a quart of rainwater and it was a good and welcome treat. I poured it into my canteen, packed up, and headed to the clearing, which was a half-mile away. I was nervous. It was like the first day of school. I got to the edge of the clearing around 10 a.m., and the ground was still wet from the rain. It was an overcast day. I looked across the clearing, and I could see him walking around, eating. I stepped into the clearing and made that Indian call again to let them know I was there. I waited to see what they were going to do. Nothing. They did nothing. They looked up and stared for a few minutes, so I walked out to the middle where Enoch had led me the day before. I stopped and waved and said, "Good morning, friends. Do you mind if I sit a while and rest?" They just stared at me, so I sat down in the grass and got some nuts from my pack and had a snack. They watched me for a few more minutes and went back to what they were doing all the time, keeping an eye on me. Over the next few days, I went to the clearing trying to gain more of their trust, but they kept their distance. The only one who would come to me was Enoch. I was running out of supplies and I needed to check on my skiff and pickup, so I headed out at sunup. It was a lot easier. I had a lot less to carry. I had to figure out how to get more supplies to the skunk ape rendezvous. I needed food to entice them to trust me and let me come closer. I went home for a few days to figure things out, and I decided that I would use an inflatable boat to ferry supplies across the deep part of the swamp. It was light and could hold a lot of weight. I spent the next few days hauling supplies to the rendezvous. The food would be the last trip. I got a big tent to put everything in to keep it dry and plan to stay 2 weeks. I got a man who lived next to the boat ramp to let me park my pickup in his backyard. One less thing to worry about. Back at the rendezvous camp, I went to work, spending as much time as they let me watching them. The food was going fast and still I was getting nowhere. I leave food and when I come back, it'd be gone. They didn't hide when I came around, but wouldn't let me get close. I tried day and night. I had better results at night. They come around my camp, but would stay just out of sight. I could see them standing there in the dark, but that's all the contact I had. I never quite knew how many of them there were. They'd come and go. I couldn't keep track of them, but my guess was around 15, give or take one or two.